When sizing text using CSS, we tend to use one of three units, either the fixed pixel unit or the relative M unit or rem units. With responsive web design, the recommendation has long been to use relative font sizes so they can change and adapt to the environment, and the default for a long time has been the M unit. Now that default is shifting towards the rem unit. I think it's useful to understand what these units are and how they interact, so let's take a brief look at pix versus M versus rem. The pixel unit is the easiest to wrap your head around because it's an absolute length unit. Set the font size property of a document to 20 pixels, and font that isn't otherwise styled will always be exactly 20 pixels in size. You can see that here, this is a 20 pixel font, and if I highlight it in my browser developer tools and go to the computed styles, down here it says font size 20 pixels. If I then go and change it to 16 pixels, like in this example here, then the font size is always 16 pixels. It's a fixed unit, so it remains exactly the same no matter what happens. Then we come to the M unit, which is a relative length unit, meaning its calculated value changes depending on external factors. 1M is the font size of the parent container. So when you set the font size of two different elements to 1M, you may get different results. In this example up at the top here, we have some text set to the size of 1M. If I click on it, you'll see down here it says font size 20 pixels because the parent element has the font size of 20 pixels. But if I scroll down, you'll see here we have another element, and in this case, the font size for the container is set to 28 pixels, and that means the font size to 1M is 28 pixels as well, because 1M relates to the parent font size, so in this case 28M, even though the root font size is just 20M. So you can see this text sized with an M is much larger than this text, which is also set to the same size, which is 1M. I like to think of the M unit as being scoped to its parent container. Change the font size of the parent, change the calculated side of the M. This can get really confusing really fast, especially if you nest containers inside other containers and use M values within those containers, because you then get a lot of calculations that happen to figure out what the font size is, and you may easily get confusing and unexpected behavior. The rem unit does away with the problems introduced by M by setting the length of one rem equal to the font size of the root element. It's relative in that if you change the font size of the root element, then anything sized using rem changes. In other words, the rem unit is globally scoped, and you can see that in my example. Here's some text sized to 1 rem, and you can see if we highlight it, the text size or the font size is 20 pixels. If I then scroll down, we have another piece of text here that's inside the container with a font size set to 28 pixels. And if we inspect that one, you'll see the font size is still 20 pixels because it's relative to the root element at the very top here. So even though it's sitting inside a container with a different font size, the rem-sized unit remains the same no matter what. For this reason, I prefer using rem units. They require much less thinking, and they produce exactly the output I want every time. That said, I've seen some very clever setups taking advantage of the scoping in the M unit, so it's definitely still in use. You just have to think about what you're looking for here. Consistent sizing or some form of relative sizing based on the font size of the containing element.